So now your team's kicked off and ready to get into user research. As user researchers, everything we talk about building empathy with users, is about being in front of them, seeing the whites of their eyes, observing the movements, reading their body language. How can you build that connection if you're not actually with your users? Remote research is a challenge that we've actually had at Spark for quite a few years. This isn't a new one for us. It might be because we have a necessity to speak with different users at different locations on the same day. It might be because of tight schedules. It might just be because we don't have the funding to travel around the country and book usability labs. One project in particular that comes to mind is when we partnered with NHS Digital. We were carrying out research on several different health systems, suppliers, and clinical groups spread across the entire country. We had pretty tight schedules and pretty big outcomes to achieve, so we had to consider remote research in order to achieve those outcomes. When we started, the first questions we asked ourselves were, what type of insights am I going to lose by not meeting these users? And how can I mitigate that? Or does it even matter? Then we asked ourselves, what new and potentially unforeseen events are we going to come across? And how do we prepare for them in advance? We actually ended up having a pretty successful few months of remote sessions, but it didn't come without its frustrations. I can tell you, after spending an hour trying to get somebody connected to the prototype online, whilst also trying to explain how to turn on their webcam so that we could see their hands over their laptop and see what keys they were pressing and their mouse movements, it was very frustrating, and we should have learned quite quickly just to ditch the session earlier, because both us and the user were frustrated, and that user decided not to come back with us and not to try again. So my first piece of advice is to adapt your methods. I'm aware that lots of you, especially the user researchers, you'll have your own favourite suite of tools that you like to use, but have you considered which tools are going to be remote friendly and for which methods? The key here is to think about the next best alternative. It's not going to be a perfect scenario. If you love to use something like InVision and your user can't cope with it, what's your next best alternative? Can you send out a PDF? Can you try a simpler prototyping tool for them to work through? Can you just post them the screens printed out for them to write all over? That's something that worked really well for us with one of our users. If you're as geeky as me and some of other researchers, you can even put together a little matrix of all the tools you have available to you. And don't forget about Paper, Post, Google Documents, and all those simple ones. And then across the top, you can list all the outcomes you're trying to achieve or all the methods that you like to use. And really think through each tool. In what remote scenarios would it be possible? What would the user have to add to their computer or phone and set up in order to use that? Then make sure your participants are on the same page and they know what you're expecting from them. Make sure you understand if they know what they need to do early on, and leave loads of time for clarifications, practice, maybe even have a short pre-meeting so you can test out the tools. Next, have backups. As I mentioned in my little story, we didn't have a backup. We just kept going and hammering ahead with the same approach, and it didn't work. You're going to come across unforeseen events, and being remote makes that even more likely. I cannot believe we have not yet had a technical issue, but they happen so frequently. They cause confusion and frustration, and they will mean your user doesn't want to come back to you. Make sure your user knows you have alternatives as well. Make sure they know that there's not just one thing and that you can adapt it if they're having trouble. Having several ways to get in touch with participants is a classic example. What if they have no mobile signal? Do you have their landline number? If you're trying to email them a link, can you WhatsApp it to them? If their laptop isn't working, can you just do the test on their phone? Preparation and communication is the key. I like to ask myself, what do I do if X happens? And think through, almost like a risk assessment, all the little things that could go wrong so that I have an alternative for them. As we've learned, some things can't be helped, and you just need to end the session. It might be better to reschedule it or just cancel it. You're the judge of whether the research is worth it. Maybe the backup to that is just recruiting more users than you normally would for this type of situation. So if some sessions don't work, you're happy to just ditch them before it gets disastrous. The listening begins before the research. Make sure whoever you're researching with is okay with what you've asked them for, and make sure you can give them easier options if they're not. The easiest way to start, honestly, is just a phone call. Understand what they're able to access. Assisted digital users will struggle the most with remote research, but anyone can be non-digital for a day. At the start of lockdown, we had frequent power cuts. Turns out it was nothing to do with lockdown. They were just sorting out the cabling outside our street. But we had a lot of power cuts. So even I was non-digital once my laptop died. When you're recruiting users, check their digital skills. Maybe have a list of how you can contact them. Post, phone, mobile, email, laptop. Make sure you understand that. The most straightforward way of carrying out research with someone with low digital skills is just a telephone interview. And it seems like you might not get enough, but it's actually really beneficial. They're sat in their own environment, they feel safe, they're using a method of communication they understand, and they're relaxed, which might lead to the golden nuggets of information if you ask her questions properly. These interviews can seem less intimidating and less formal than face-to-face. Also, you're building rapport with the user in the way that they most like to interact. It helps you build empathy and helps you understand the user better. So it's more effort, but being remote reminds you to reconsider your norms, get back to basics, and think outside the box. There are also benefits to researching remotely. It lifts up barriers and allows room for more detailed and honest answers. It can save time and money, and because you're no longer restricted by location, you can actually access a hugely diverse pool of participants in a range of locations in a single day. You can even go international. Another benefit is users are using their own devices. They're in context, at home, and probably giving you more natural behaviour. So adapt your methods, but have a backup for them. Start with a simple phone call and make the most of the situation.